Hi, this is Gary Zacharias, and I appreciate you listening to the Apologist Bookshelf. I thought maybe this time, when I'm recording this is mid-December of 2025, so I started thinking about the books that I've read this year that influenced me and made me think, and I've done a lot of podcasts on them, maybe a couple of them in here I haven't gotten around to yet. And this is not all the Christian books I've read, but just the ones that struck me as particularly interesting. So I'm going to start with a 4-pack. These are 4 books that I read because I think I told you in a previous podcast, I've gotten really hooked in this whole idea of artificial intelligence, and I've spoken on it in several classes at my church and at another church, and people are very, very interested in this. Some are concerned about AI, some just don't know much about it. Other people think it's going to be great things, and we, as Christians, shouldn't always be downers and worriers. And then you got some people that think maybe it's going to be used, I don't know, maybe as part of the Great Deception when the Antichrist shows up. So there's a lot of different takes on AI. So here are 4 books. One, I don't think I've talked about this one yet, and I'll tell you why. It's not a Christian book, but it is wonderful. It's called The Complete Beginner's Guide to AI, subtitled Your Easy Guide to Artificial Intelligence, Real-World Applications, Ethical Issues, and Future Innovations. The author, Gloria Limbo, Lembo. And what I like is she's got all sorts of practical things that you can go check on. I mean, I've got a section here like choosing the right tool, she says, if you're going to get involved with AI. So she's got ChatGPT, of course, Microsoft Copilot, Google Assistant, Notion AI, Grammarly, and then she's got that was productivity. Then she's got a section on health and fitness. She's got finance management, home automation, education and learning, creative tools, communication and collaboration, travel and navigation. I mean, it's just amazing. She just has spent a lot of time on this. Of course, the only catch, when you write a book on something as quick developing as AI, maybe some of the things she's written down are already gone or they've been surpassed by something else. So that's something to keep in mind. But that's a good book, The Complete Beginner's Guide to AI. By the way, I won't spend as much time on each of the other books because we have a 2-hour podcast coming if I do that. Here's a second book called What Christians Should Know About AI, subtitled Navigating Artificial Intelligence with Biblical Wisdom. And this is excellent. The 2 authors have been involved in AI big time. One is an AI researcher. He's got his MBA. He's co-founder of the AI lab at Biola University. The other one has been involved in something like 15 years of machine learning and autonomy. And this is so good. How AI impacts business, the economy, human relationships, risks that could challenge Christian values, practical strategies to harness their potential while upholding faith. I mean, it's just excellent book. And it's short. Let's see. I think I have done a podcast on this. About like 115, 116 pages. The third one that's dealing with AI, it's called Made in Our Image, subtitled God, Artificial Intelligence, and You. Stephen Driscoll is the author. I really like the cover because he said he used AI to create the cover. It's what looks like a robot, but he's wearing a clerical collar. He's got a Christian cross hanging from that, and he's holding onto a Bible. So it's something where you look at it and go, what? But it's a really good book. He's basically asking the question, how should we as Christians navigate through all these changes that are going on? What will living for Jesus look like in a world where humans made in God's image coexist with intelligent machines that are made in our image? So good book, Made in Our Image. Okay, one more. This will be the last one that I did this year as far as AI goes. It's Are We All Cyborgs Now? Subtitle, Reclaiming Our Humanity from the Machine. And several people say it's an important book, beautifully written. Somebody said it was nicely organized. One person, when I started reading it, I couldn't put it down. Somebody said that the authors distilled wisdom from tech critics, theologians, and poets. How to live as humans in a world that's being ordered to artificial intelligence. Yeah, so this is I will just say it's a meaty book. I mean, almost, well, 450 pages or so. And some of it's pretty deep. And you may end up skimming parts of it. I did, but I got a lot out of it. So good book. Are We All Cyborgs Now? All right, so that clears the deck, right? Those were 4 books that I read this year that dealt with artificial intelligence. I just put out a challenge to all of you. We're going to be living in a world that's going to be more and more influenced by AI, and we've got to figure out what is our position as Christians. How do we live in this kind of world? So really important. All right, let's move on to something else. Sean McDowell, general editor of a book called Apologetics for an Ever-Changing Culture. And it's subtitled A Biblical and Culturally Relevant Approach to Talking About God. And I think that's a good thing to have because we're living in an age that keeps changing as far as how people want to think about God. And so they've got a section in here. As an example, one section is called New Challenges. One part of that is urban apologetics, the big cities now. Another section on homosexuality, subtitled Truth and Grace. By the way, the author of that one is Alan Schleman. He's part of Stand to Reason. Oh, he is so good. So this is a great article. How about this one, Defending Femininity, Why Jesus is Good News for Women. Yeah, and then the abortion debate and critical theory, that's Neil Shenvi, writes that article. That's really good. The transgender debate. And what are some other things? A Fresh Apologetic, Josh McDowell writes that. John Stonestreet has an article. Sean McDowell has an article. Natasha Crane, Brian Godawa. Now, Brian, if you know anything about him, he's a great storyteller. And so he's got a chapter in here, Storytelling and Persuasion. So this is a good one, Apologetics for an Ever-Changing Culture. You know why I like a book like that? It's varied. I mean, they have all these different authors, and you can kind of skip from one to the next. You don't have to read them in order, and you'll find something. I just guarantee you'll find something good. Okay, here's another one. Jeremiah Johnston. That's Johnston, not Johnson, but Johnston. Jeremiah J. Johnston. Book called Unanswered. Subtitle, Lasting Truth for Trending Questions. And a man who's the president of the Museum of the Bible, Carrie Summers, says a must-read, extremely well-researched, easy to understand answers and application. And by the way, Jeremiah Johnston is an interesting guy. You'd like him. He's the founder and president of Christian Thinkers Society. He does a lot of interviews. You'll see a lot of his talks are on YouTube. What I think is fascinating is he's gotten really involved in the Shroud of Turin, and he tours with a replica of that and a replica of what the body would look like as far as the way the shroud shows it. And if you don't know anything about the Shroud of Turin, I'm going to have to skip over that for now. It's just this ancient shroud that's been found that seems to have an image of a crucified man on it. So anyway, some people think that's kind of sensationalistic, but super interesting. So that's Jeremiah Johnston. So this book, by the way, Lee Strobel gives it a high review. So here come the questions that he says we need to be answering, right? Because he says they're unanswered. Question 1, what do I do when God is silent? People worry about that, right? What happens if you pray and you're not hearing God at all? How about this one? Why can I trust in the bodily resurrection of Jesus? And how does that change things today? Here's another one. What Christians must understand about suicide and mental health. I think that one is so needed today because as a Christian myself, I feel lost and uncomfortable. I don't know how to deal with that very effectively. I've got students in my classes that get very depressed. Anyway, so that's a good chapter. We've got a chapter on the paranormal. We get one section, why most Christians know just enough about the Bible to be dangerous. Yeah. So anyway, and of course the issue of pain and suffering and evil in the world. But I like that book a great deal. One more time, it's called Unanswered. Okay, well, I told you I had a lot of good books here. How about one called The Case for Jesus? The Case for Jesus. His name is Brant Now, I don't want to mess up his last name. It's Pitre. Pitre, maybe? Okay, Case for Jesus. Well, people said things like this. Thanks to his book, you'll now be equipped to make the case for Jesus and the truth of the Gospels to even the most ardent skeptics. That's a good comment, isn't it? Well, I found it to be a really excellent book. Craig Keener gives it a thumbs up. Wow, really, really good. The book is, he's a young scholar, by the way, and he wrestles with things about Jesus and his identity. He actually makes a great case here for Jesus as the divine Son of God, that he's fully human and he's fully God. One person called it a delight to read. Yeah, and it's easy to understand why we can trust the Gospels. And it's not that long a book. It's, let's see here, a couple hundred pages. Yeah, just barely 200 pages. I know you get a lot out of it. Of course, I keep saying really good. But yeah, if I have a book I read and I don't like it particularly, I don't talk about it. These are all excellent. How about this challenge? Do you recognize the name Rod Dreher? He wrote a book called The Benedict Option, big bestseller. Here's one called Live Not by Lies, and he calls it a manual for Christian dissents. For Christian dissidents. I said that wrong. So Rod Dreher, he's an editor of American Conservative. He's written for all sorts of newspapers. Commentary's been in the Wall Street Journal. Anyway, interesting guy. So he said, what's going on in our country today is what he calls soft totalitarianism. In other words, you're not thrown in jail for being a Christian, but you are embarrassed or you're outed in some way, or there's some kind of pressure, social pressure on you. And how do we resist that? And he said he's heard over and over people who have survived communist oppression are sounding the alarm and giving us possible answers why we don't even recognize the threat of totalitarianism. And he lays out the steps that we should do for resistance. And he shares some amazing stories in here of modern-day dissidents who are able to keep their faith and their integrity during a bunch of really terrible tyranny that was going on. So that one has some excellent stories. If we're all story, excuse me, we're all story lovers. How about Stephen Meyer? What a great author. He's turned out book after book about science and the idea of there being a God. Now, he wrote a book. It's not a new book. By the way, none of these are particularly new. They were just new to me. So he wrote a book called Return of the God Hypothesis, 3 scientific discoveries that reveal the mind behind the universe. And I had read it some time ago, but I forget what was going on, but I was in kind of a hurry and I just kind of skimmed through it. And I thought, gee, I hate to do that. And I went back and I read it much more closely this time. It is a terrific book. And what he does, basically, he talks about 3 scientific discoveries that he says make some big, have some big implications for theism. Yeah. So it's like what's going on the beginning of the universe, right? How do you explain that if there's no God? How do you get a universe starting? And then what about things like design? What about information? Biology, things like that. Really, really interesting book. Deep. Yeah, it's deep. And you can, if you have to, skip some parts of it. I didn't skip it, but I'll admit I didn't read in depth some of it. But it's really good stuff. A couple of people, Michael Denton says an irrefutable case for God. Peter Robinson, interesting guy, calls it straightforward, engrossing prose, close reasoning, intellectual history, and cosmology. Yeah, good material here. I tell you what's really good about this book is it's something you could share with a non-Christian, and I don't know where they're going to disagree with this, because the things that Stephen Meyer is talking about are being found and being found true, and it's science, not philosophers or theologians. It's science that's pointing toward the existence of a God. And so I think any friend of yours who's a non-theist, doesn't believe in a God, is going to read that book and I think be challenged. Well, here's another one by Hugh Ross I read this year. It just came out. I think this one was a new book this year. It's called Noah's Flood Revisited. And I really enjoyed reading this. I always like Hugh Ross's material. He makes me think. Sometimes I'm not sure. I really buy everything. But I find him challenging, and he makes a really good case for his point. So what he's talking about is the flood, that it was real. Now, what's going to get some people upset? He does not think the flood was worldwide. In other words, it didn't flood South America and North America and Asia and everywhere. He thinks it was universal, meaning it wiped out the human race except for Noah and his family. All right, so he thinks it was a local flood, and he gives all sorts of reasoning for that. He tells you how you'd build an ark like this. Could a family build an ark this big? He talks about how long ago did Noah live, and I think you'd be surprised with what he comes up with and why he comes up with that dating. So that's a good one. I got about 3 more. Okay, you still with me here? Here's one that we are going to do in our apologetics class in the coming year at our church, because we've had several people tell us, I had a friend or I had a family member who was a Christian and has now said, I don't buy it anymore. I don't believe it. I don't like Christianity because, and then they have some reasons, and they said, I've discovered real freedom. I've gotten rid of this yoke, this oppressive Christianity, this slavery condition that I was in, and I'm free now. So there's a book out by Elisa Childers and Tim Barnett. Childers wrote Another Gospel, and Tim Barnett is, if you have a chance, he's excellent. He does something called Red Pen Logic on YouTube. Take a look sometime. Tim Barnett, Barnett. What he does, he takes on people who are making challenges to Christianity and shows problems with their logic. So this book is called The Deconstruction of Christianity: What It Is, Why It's Destructive, and How to Respond. That's the subtitle. Carl Trueman gives a foreword, and if you know anything about Carl Trueman, that's quite a high honor. Rosaria Butterfield, who was a lesbian and became a Christian and married a man, and just her life has completely changed. She said this book is the wake-up call that the true church needs. How about Greg Koukl, president of Stand to Reason? If you have loved ones caught up in the deconstruction web woven by ex-evangelical YouTubers and TikTokers, let Elisa Childers and Tim Barnett guide you out of the confusing tangle. So that's a pretty good compliment coming from Greg Koukl. Okay, 2 to go. How about, I like Natasha Crane. Everything she puts out is excellent. Oh, she's so good. She's had several books about guiding your kids and answering their questions and how to interact with your kids. Well, here's one for adults. It's called When Culture Hates You. And she subtitles it, Persevering for the Common Good as Christians in a Hostile Public Square. Boy, isn't that exactly where we are now? A hostile public square. You bring up Christianity, and you don't get just a pat on the back anymore, right? Yeah. So, again, Greg Koukl says this about the book. What Natasha Crane has accomplished in When Culture Hates You is remarkable. Her warning of the escalating dangers facing followers of Christ is appropriately charged with urgency and not a moment too soon. A dark evil is rapidly descending on our children, our families, and our churches, and multitudes of Christians are oblivious to the threat. Well, there are a lot of other people that compliment John Stonestreet, president of the Colson Center, voice of Breakpoint. He gives it a real positive review. Anyway, so it's got things like this. Understanding the hate, right? What's going on? And how to persevere in the public square. And how do we respond to the most prominent charges we're hearing today? Now, here's one that interested me a lot because I finally worked up a talk on it because it's become so big. It's Christian nationalism. Maybe you've heard about that. People are liberals and secularists, critics of Christianity are saying Christians are trying to take over the government and impose their will on everybody. What about misogyny? View from pro-choice activists, transgender, sexual revolution, I mean, some really, really good topics that she covers. And I'll just say anything by Crane, that's Crain, not A-N-E, it's Crain. Anything that Natasha Crane puts out is quality. All right, I'll end on this one. There's one more. Eric Metaxas, that's Metaxas, Metaxas, has a book out called Is Atheism Dead? And I think that's an interesting topic because remember, years ago there was a Time magazine article that said, is God dead? So he's coming back and he's saying, no, actually we're starting to turn back toward God. Now he covers some of the same things that Stephen Meyer does as far as the fine-tuned universe and things like that, or how we got life here. But the part that I like a lot, he's got a big section on archaeology. So I don't know if you're an archaeology fan, but he tells some interesting stories here about the findings that they've had with archaeology. Really good stuff. And then one section on atheism itself. Is atheism evil? And what about atheists who found God? And he tells the stories of Sartre and Fleu and Camus. And he does a section on problems with atheism, the impossible bleakness of materialism, the myth of atheism, Galileo, Copernicus, and the Church. He has a section here on how Christianity begat science. And then he has a section of great scientists who are devout Christians. So what he's trying to say is be more optimistic, right? The secularists, the ones who have poo-pooed Christianity and said atheism is the way of the future, they're having to back up, right? Because so much is coming out now that suggests there is a God. Well, phew. Okay, so those are quite a few books, but if you didn't catch some of the titles and you want me to tell you more about them or tell you what number of my podcasts dealt with them or anyway, so whatever sounds good, if you have some questions about these books, just contact me. And so my challenge too, I'm going to put this podcast out right near the end of the year, is find some good Christian books for 2026 and dig in because there's a book for any kind of interest that you have. All right, well, I hope you do have a good 2026. Thanks for listening and hope to have a lot of good podcasts in 2026.